I was going to check on what's playing out in the crypto market. Now we're seeing red on the screen again, just like yesterday. So we're seeing this week quite pressured for Bitcoin and major altcoins. To another conversation, we see Nigeria's Web3 ecosystem is entering a new phase of growth with startup funding more than doubling to $43 million in 2025 and stablecoin adoption accelerating across payments and digital finance. A new industry report now positions Nigeria as Africa's leading Web3 developer hub, highlighting rising innovation, stronger investor interest, and growing real-world use cases beyond crypto trading. Joining me now to unpack this, we have Uchenna Delga as the Africa lead, hashed emergent. Great to have you on the show.
Hi, thank you, Ladi, for having me on the show.
Yeah, so what are the key highlights and major takeaways from the Nigeria Web3 Landscape Report, and that's for 2025?
So the Nigeria Web3 Landscape Report 2025, we've uncovered a couple of insights, most especially from the startup and ecosystem. We also found out that the Nigerian ecosystem currently has over 110 startups, of which they've been able to raise $170 million plus from 2020 to 2025, which shows that although the ecosystem is still early, it's on a very growth trajectory for the next phase. So another very important insight from the report was that in 2025, the Web3 startups in Nigeria raised $43 million. And this funding was more than doubled from $20 million in the previous year, which is 2024. And the major reason for this jump is because of the growth of stablecoin-driven financial apps that have, flooded the market. And a lot of interest is also from investors, also coming from the stablecoins adoption that is currently being noticed in the Nigerian ecosystem. And that's why a lot of investors are currently flooding into the finance sector to fund these Web3 startups that are building in the stablecoin vertical in Nigeria.
So the report says Nigeria's Web3 ecosystem is becoming, more mature. How's that showing up in the market today?
So it's showing in different ways. So a few years back, the activity was largely dependent on speculation. So there was a lot of speculative trading, a lot of quick token launches, a lot of retail hype in the market. But today we're seeing builders, we're seeing developers, we're seeing stronger companies building real-world products with clear business models, right? So what this means is founders are increasingly focused on revenue, compliance, and of course, long-term sustainability of these products, right? So that means that the ecosystem has moved from the speculative side to real-world adoption. That's why a lot of builders are building towards that direction as well. And so when we say that the Nigerian Web3 ecosystem is maturing, we say that the ecosystem has moved beyond speculation into real-world adoption. Of course, that's why you see a lot of development in the stablecoin side, where a lot of companies are building stablecoin projects to really address specific pinpoint problem in the payment system in Nigeria, and of course Africa at large, and also at the same time focus on growing this business in the long term. So when we say that the ecosystem is maturing, this is what we mean by that.
All right, so before now, traders, they'd love to get into the crypto market, digital assets to make 100x, 10x, 1000x, but those X's are not happening anymore. So would you say the rapid rise in stablecoin usage is because of economic realities in Nigeria, or is it real innovation we're seeing?
I would say both. I mean, the reason for this stablecoin adoption is it's both as a necessity and is also both coming from genuine invention, driven invention from these builders. And so when I mean necessity, of course, we understand that Naira has been devaluation has happened in the Nigerian Naira, and also inflation is currently ongoing, in the country's economy. And one of the ways that a lot of people are hedging against inflation and currency devaluation is by adopting USD stablecoins, because of the fact that with your smartphone, with your internet, you can be able to access, stablecoins, right? You don't need any intermediary, any other intermediary or traditional platform organization to be able to access stablecoins. It makes it quite easy for people to primarily use stablecoins as currency against currency volatility, and of course, a faster and cheaper way to move money as well. So it is also driving genuine invention, and by that we mean that a lot of startups are now embedding stablecoins into their product, into their saving products, into their payment infrastructure, and even payroll systems right now. So I think that's where innovation comes in, which is turning this turning this stablecoins adoption driven by necessity into a new financial layer that a lot of businesses and a lot of companies and a lot of organizations are currently adopting. For example, I'll give you an example. I mean, one of Nigeria's fintech unicorn recently just partnered with a blockchain company to power their stablecoins transactions. This shows that there's a clear need for this stablecoins infrastructure in all of these companies and all of these startups. So this adoption is quite very clear, and it is driven by necessity as far as the economic values is talked about, and also by genuine invention as long as the builders are interested in building in that vertical. Yeah.
All right, so looking ahead, what opportunities and challenges do you see for Nigeria's Web3 industry? I'm sure there's some investors sitting in the sideline now, local investors wondering how they can put money into Web3 at this point. What are you seeing?
So I think first off, I'm saying there's going to be a deeper integration with traditional finance. In the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to have banks, fintechs, and Web3 companies collaborating rather than operating separately, right? With the recent regulatory development in USA of the Genius Act, we're seeing a lot of emerging markets develop as a regulatory framework for stable coins, right? And this is where I feel in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a lot of integration in traditional finance. A lot of fintechs, a lot of banks would begin to introduce stable coins rather than operating separately. Secondly, what I think is going to be the outlook in Nigeria's ecosystem in the next 1 or 2 or 3 years is there's going to be more regulatory clarity, which should definitely unlock more institutional participation. So currently, we're seeing a couple of updates when it comes to regulatory clarity in the Web3 space, although there has been delay in terms of implementation. But in the next few years, we are going to see more clarity in terms of regulation, compliance, and policy, which should eventually unlock institutional participation.
Yeah. All right, a lot to unpack there, and definitely we'll keep watching and see how the space grows in Nigeria. Thank you so much, Uchenna Deoga, Africa Lead, #emergent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ladi. Have a good one.